Hello, everybody. Welcome to all of you to the second day of our Clinician Engineer webinar series. Today we have a lot of fun talks and then also a panel discussion, and we have a keynote speaker also joining today. I'd like to introduce our co-hosts today. So I have Mr. Faisal, who's a medical student. Faisal, would you mind introducing yourself?
Thank you, Dr. Katherine, and my name is Faisal Nawaz. I am a fourth-year medical student at Mohammed bin Rashid University in Dubai. I am also the strategy lead for the Clinician Engineer Hub for the Middle East region. And it is a pleasure to have all of you with us today as part of the audience.
Thank you, Faisal. And I'd like to introduce Mrs. Liana, who's also joining us from Germany. Liana, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Liana Shvachiy. I'm a PhD student in Göttingen University, and I'm also a representative of EIT Health alumni and of Students Against COVID. And I welcome you, everyone. Enjoy.
Thank you. So first of all, I'd like to thank our sponsors and collaborators. Thank you to the European Institute of Technology Health alumni who's helping us with our technology part. Also, thanks to the Student Task Force Against COVID-19 project N95, Get Us PPE, and also Med Supply Drive. This event also is made to promote and try to gather some funds in order to solve the PPE crisis around the world. I'd like to introduce then Mr. Faisal, who's gonna go ahead and get started.
Thank you. So as we've seen, our day one had some exciting lineup of speakers in the field of biomedical engineering and biosensors and architecture and medicine as well. Now we move into day two, which is more along the theme of artificial intelligence, robotics, and innovation in GI. So to begin our first session, I have Professor Lawrence Ho, who will be our keynote speaker for today. And Professor Lawrence is joining us from Singapore. It's a pleasure having you with us, Professor Lawrence. And we really appreciate you joining us, even though it's 1 a.m. on your side. So to give you an introduction, Professor Lawrence Ho is currently the Vice Dean, Research and Graduate Studies Head of the Department at the Yong Lu Lin School of Medicine and the National University of Singapore, as well as the Group Research Director at the National University Health System, and a proven clinician innovator and an experienced entrepreneur who co-founded 2 medical device startups, EndoMaster and EndoPhotonics. Dr. Lawrence has won the Singapore President's Technology Award in 2012 with his co-inventor, and he has held 3 US grant patents in medtech products. Dr. Lawrence, you may have the floor now, and pleased to have you with us.
Yeah, thanks for the kind introduction, Faisal, and thank you so much for this kind invitation, Lady Katherine. So I think, I know that there's this new thing called a Clinician Engineering Hub. So I think it's really something which I find extremely, refreshing. So I think really congrats to all of you for organizing this very successful webinar. So I think I'm going to just share my slide to facilitate my sharing session with you all. So let me just go to my slide now. So I think, yes, I am a gastroenterologist, as Faisal said. This engineering part of mine only came about by accident. So I think most of my sharing today will be based upon my personal journey going through this so-called engineering DNA while I'm practicing as a gastroenterologist. So what I intend to do tonight is to go through a few things with you. First, I think sharing with you, I think some of you may be a clinician, some may not. I think it's also good to reflect a bit about what we do in our daily life, the so-called work-life balance. Then later on, I'm going to share with you my journey, sort of marrying a different role. And finally, what I think people who are doctors can also contribute as an innovator. So let me just take you through this particular slide. This is the kind of traditional way where we try to balance what we call the work and the life of any occupation. So this, for argument's sake, I'm just going to take you through what a typical doctor does throughout their own work life. Obviously, we spend a lot of our time in our career path being trained and still learning every day. So this has taken a lot of our time. Traditionally, you know, I think our work life is really our balance by so-called the calibration of what we expect to live in this particular lifetime of ours. So I think balancing this, obviously, we go through what we call sort of our usual life in the family. So like, for instance, getting married, having kids, and finally, empty nest. So this is well and good if the kind of life expectancy is a bit short, like in 30 years ago. But it's no longer the case nowadays as we kind of prolong our life to another 30 years. So this is where a lot of people start to become a bit lost, because beyond that, I think you are no longer learning as much. And you also find that life may not be so challenging anymore. And this is why many of these doctors, clinicians, tend to actually go into other areas just to kind of make their life a bit more meaningful, maybe a bit more challenging. For instance, I think the doctors who choose to become educator, researcher, administrators, and so forth. So I think we try to what we call accumulate experience and in these areas as we go through the entire clinical career track. But I think coming to that, it's certainly, I think there are other areas which we haven't explored. And this is where I think the main aim of my talk is going to be. Okay, what are other areas which we can potentially, I think, try to learn something and also try to contribute meaningfully in our lifetime. So how I actually venture into this thing is really by accident. I think a lot of the time, I think we started off as a doctor. I think Faisal is a medical student, so you will get bogged down sooner or later as a doctor, and then you get scopes and whatever you do. And after a while, you kind of, well, you scope in and out every day, and then you want to do something else. For instance, I became a professor of medicine, again by accident, just ventured into research. And then I was also administrator and so forth. So I think a lot of people will be very happy after a while. You've done all this. But how did I actually end up as an innovator and more recently as an entrepreneur? So this is why something has come about. And I believe that this is something quite meaningful as well. So perhaps I will share with you my journey into this so-called innovation as well as startup. And chiefly, it's actually need-driven. We have to understand that sometimes we have certain things that I think certain questions we cannot answer. For instance, as an endoscopy, I think how can we actually operate as a surgeon? Because I think way back, I asked myself the question, I think how could I be as good as a surgeon? I could never be as good as a surgeon. And the reason is because I could not operate using both hands. So I think to solve this, I think to cut the story short, I met up with an engineering professor, and then we came up with this idea, putting two arms inside. And then we also borrowed the idea of the chili crab. I think for those of you who have been to Singapore, this is a very delicious dish, basically chili and a crab. And then the crab has a claw, which is very robust, but yet the claw doesn't need a lot of movements. And from that, we actually literally translate this into a blueprint on a tissue paper, which the inspiration came during a meal over the chili crab. And from there, obviously, I think we try to mimic what a human arm is doing. And then eventually, this is our first prototype, the so-called master robot. So I think with this sort of prototype, we refined and eventually succeeded in doing the world's first endoscopic robotic gastric ESD way back. And then finally, from there, we managed to venture into human studies and so forth, and then spin off into a company which is called Endomaster. So I think we've gone a long way. And now, obviously, I think we are also experimenting with other things which enable us to use this platform to perform surgery. Obviously, we need to solve, besides this sort of triangulation, which is what the robotic platform has enabled us to do, we also wanted to solve access as well as closure. So this basically, this video will show how our latest prototype has actually succeeded in doing suturing. This is kind of how we do it.
We now spool the suture.
So I think if you notice
Knots are then tied by passing the
suturing,
needle
like
between the
a
arms of the
surgeon
needed driver.
needs two arms. There's no way you can do suturing using one arm.
The knot is secured.
So that's where the two arms come very handy. And this is actually
The suture is
manipulated
cut.
on the left-hand side by a traditional, such as a Da Vinci kind of master thing. So I think moving on, obviously, I think the important, I think, point is that it is possible, okay, to start to do certain things if we have a certain need, and then we explore using some technology to solve this particular need. And I think today's theme is also on so-called AI. I share with you my next startup, which came a few years after this first one. And that was on artificial intelligence, the so-called endophotonics. And why I think this concept came about is, again, is driven by some sort of unfulfilled or some or unmet need. If you look at how we perform endoscopy, dominantly it's a diagnostic tool, but it requires a lot of so-called subjectivity training. Okay, we need a perfect vision to pick up whatever you need to see. And then after that, you have to take biopsy and then send to the pathologist. Again, we'll look down under the microscope. So all along, I think you're relying upon human sense. So AI is actually utilization of the brain. We also, I think a lot of our diagnostic tools use the other part of the five senses. Okay, so vision, and then we'll palpate is touch, and then like my robotics is actually sense of touch as well as sense of motions. So what we are trying to do is really mimicking the human body. So I think with that, you look at it, wow, can we actually obviate all this subjectivity from our equation? That's where we came about to say that let's forget about all these things and then go on to totally different. Because ultimately, what is actually diagnosis? Diagnosis is actually getting the diagnosis. We don't need all these steps. So that's where we came up with the idea of having something which is jumping the steps straight into using a laser beam here, excite the tissue, and then you come up with a so-called molecular signature. It collects this Raman scattering, which is then going back go back to the system and then captured by the spectrometer, and then after that translate into so-called molecular fingerprint. So I think I won't go into too much technical details because of time constraint. Suffice to say that I think pathology is actually about structure, about morphology. But really, do we need this sort of morphology to make the diagnosis? If you have the molecule, say for instance, you got a spectrum, then you just basically have this spectral pattern instead to make the diagnosis. And that's exactly what, spectrometer for the drug assay, so forth, relies upon. It's a spectrum. So I think if you can reliably capture this sort of molecular fingerprint in terms of spectrum pattern, you don't actually need the visualization, and neither do you need the pathology to tell you how does this look like, is this tumor, is this not, and so forth. So I think this sort of technology is fairly mature now, and then obviously I think we use that, and then we translate into so just now you saw a probe, which can then capture the signal, and then after that will be analyzed by the computer It doesn't require contrast at all. And finally, you can just display in terms of whatever you fancy. So I think that's now the latest, our prototype, which is almost going to be commercial. It kind of utilizes this kind of probe plus a spectrometer, and then there's a laser generator. Say this is a patient with cancer. It makes a lot of noise. Each time there's a cancer, it will make a noise. If there's no cancer, it doesn't make a noise and so forth. So I think this is good in terms of ESD margin and so forth. Okay, so that's a kind of typical thing we do these days. And you don't need actually image at all. I know there's a lot of image AI around. Image AI needs good images in order for the AI to make the diagnosis, but this sort of thing doesn't need images at all. So I think that's the kind of thing. I have other things as well, but I won't share with you because of time. So I think suffice to say that I think a lot of people ask, so what, all these things? I think to a clinician, you might as well wait for the engineers to discover all this. My own thought is that, well, as a gastroenterologist, obviously we get respect, we get valued because of our skills. Obviously, I think that we all like to be empowered, isn't it? So that's where we get our satisfaction because we manage to do this and that. And because of that reason, sometimes I do believe that this is also a hindrance to our innovative self, because we are so valued, so why should we destroy ourselves? That's where sometimes we stop thinking. And that's where I'm going to share with you also, besides the career path, why I believe that gastroenterologists have a big role to play in terms of solving a lot of current unmet needs. Because if you practice as a clinician solely, you only solve one problem each time. You have to see a lot of patients in a clinic to solve many, many problems. If you're a teacher, a researcher, of course, you solve many more. As a head of department, you can ask 10 doctors to do work for you. So your impact is actually 10 times. I believe that if you can solve a big issue as an innovator, your impact again is magnified, scale. And finally, as an entrepreneur, that is the final goal. I'm not an entrepreneur yet. I'm far from it because I'm still very poor. I don't have any money. But if you're an entrepreneur, you just need to invest and sit back. And then after that, things will happen, like Bill Gates. Doesn't need to work, and then just go around doing a lot of charity work. That is the ultimate goal. So I'm trying to say, I think it's worthwhile if you can go through in your lifetime the entire 4 quadrants. That is something that, well, at the end of your kind of the last how many years, you feel extremely, you feel rewarded for being able to contribute in every quadrant of the so-called careers impact. So I think with that, the final message is, I think to do innovation, you do have to go through a certain steps. I won't have time to share with you everything. Essentially, you started with the issue, you finish with the impact, and that's the 6S imagery. So I think just to conclude, I believe myself, I think I'm a gastroenterologist. We can certainly contribute beyond our traditional roles as a clinician, educator, researcher, and or administrator. And nowadays, I think that there's a new term called clinician innovator, clinician entrepreneur. And I believe that this is going to be an emerging kind of track. And I believe that the impact can potentially be much bigger, and it's across space, time, and people. And lastly, I think for innovation to be successful, I think it must always start with an issue, and then it should also finish with the impact as its end. So with that, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lawrence. Truly inspiring and eye-opening in the sense that this is more than just looking at a one-dimensional field in medicine, which is no longer the case in our generation now and the generations to come, where we are more focused towards interdisciplinary collaborations and to building our profile and career into something that expands more than just our role as a clinician. So thank you again for that. And the audience is obviously more than welcome to ask any questions, but I do have a question of my own, and this is with regards to the device startup EndoMaster that you've contributed to. So how can institutions implement this technology on sort of a global scale? And this takes into account every form of civilization around us. So we have lower income countries, middle income countries, and this brings into an exciting question in that sense.
Yeah, so I think that's a very, very pertinent question. I think you're talking about how do we contribute socially as well. So I believe in any technology, obviously there's also, I think the requirement to satisfy the investor, and the investor is driven by a different agenda, you know, all this. So I think in order for us to first, I think, get the thing to propagate, we must be able to scale up. That is to show that this has impact. And once we show has impact, I think that automatically when the number of people using this sort of platform increases, I think the cost to produce and to manufacture this sort of thing will come down. And then I hopefully that it will bring the price down. And this is something that we have to, I think, realize, because that's one part. I think the future, say for instance, I think relevant to this current COVID-19, it kind of exposes a lot of issues. For instance, I think in over dependence on manpower alone, obviously, I think with social distancing and so forth. So I think there's a need to shift to, maybe I think it has to think about using robots. And same with medicine as well. If you say that, okay, you will operate, okay, can we actually train so many people to operate? Maybe not. Then you can use a robot to do even endoscopic ESD across I think, between countries. And in doing so, I think you just need 5G technology and so forth. So these are all tangible benefits in future, provided we can actually bring the cost down. And that is only possible if I think we can scale up the impact of this sort of technology.
Right, and that is the $1 million question in that sense. And looking at something that you've shed some light on, which is on health tech. The health tech industry is blooming, and there's a bright future ahead for such innovations. And on that same note, we have a question from one of our audience members. So Mejia asks, what conferences do you advise to attend in the area of health tech?
I think there are a lot. Nowadays, there are a lot of conferences organized by a lot of this, I think, venture builders, whatever. I think you can just go into that, those things. I think additionally, I think we do have many of these institutional universities which are focusing more on the health tech. And personally, I do not actually, I've never attended. I'm not trained. It's just that for some reason, I think it just happened accidentally. What I think that most people should do is perhaps, I think, as Faisal correctly mentioned, I think mingle with other people, engineers and so forth. And then I think you really need to work as a team in order for you to be exposed. And when you know a bit more, then obviously I think you can actually go into those courses to enrich yourself. But I think the first step, in my mind, is I think you need to actually come together with other people. So there are medical students as well, maybe work with engineering students and so forth, solve problem at the same time. I think that's the first step.
Well said. And that really sums up our session here. However, we have, again, a few more questions. Our audience is always exciting. It's been the same scenario yesterday, and even today we have some exciting questions. So if you don't mind, Professor Lawrence, I have a question from Zoha, who asks, how do you advise to increase accessibility and awareness regarding health tech in a low resource setting, such as lower and middle income countries?
That's a good question. I think the the questions I think for most people is the awareness comes in terms of final the goal, and that's where we need to essentially is go through the first all the S first, and then have a way of solving the initial part. Health tech is challenging compared to other tech because of the initial few years, and people don't recognize that in order for your technology to go beyond the first few years, I think we really have to solve the value part. A lot of people don't know that initial part. It's not about regulation, it's not about patent, it's not about anything of those. It's really about proof of concept and proof of value. And you got to do this very early on, which means if you have something which is quite promising, I think you have to go straight to the human very soon, like what we did, to prove that it's effective, it's safe, and then you prove that it's valuable. Then after that, obviously you will secure funding, and with that you can actually go through, and then you can increase awareness and so forth. I think without the initial thing, it's going to be very difficult. And as a general setting in different countries, I think I think I'm trying to answer your question as best as I can. I think in not so rich country, I think you have to actually solve the issues relevant to your own region and so forth. For instance, a frugal technology and so forth. Again, you have to go through the same thing, find the issues, and then you got a solution. Then you have to prove that this solution works and so forth in order to gain the interest, the attraction before you go further in your entire milestone. If you can't do the first part, invariably, I think most people fail in the first few years because they are unable actually to prove that the innovation actually solves the problem or is actually effective.
Right, and again, this is a lot about the experience and the process that this brings on, from having an innovation, but then trying to scale it on a level that can be acceptable in society. So good points that you've mentioned there, Professor Lawrence. And this is sort of a personal question from your experience so far. How have you navigated through IP issues that may happen with your institutions during this time, and including acquiring funding to develop these devices?
Yeah, I think the IP is probably not as important initially. It's really something that we only do it to deter other people, so that you have something which you can then secure as a value. Because eventually, I think the IP is a kind of like passport for you to. It's your asset. If you start off with something the technology, and then and the investor will come after to you because you need some funding. They will go and look at you, and then they calculate what sort of assets have you got. Okay, IP, if you're secure, is one asset. Then they look at you. Oh, you look somewhat intelligent. Maybe you're an asset. Maybe you're a liability. And then they'll put all the sums together. And then if you have done a few human studies, then they say, oh, well, maybe this is okay. So I think what we are trying to do is essentially the first few years, get as much value as possible. Do everything to get the value. So IP comes in that sense. Otherwise, it's pretty much not so important until much later when you really prove everything, you've got the regulation, then you can start to actually produce a lot more IPs, because bear in mind that IP costs money. And then you have to get to pay for your to file IP is very expensive. So my own thing is, I think, do as much as possible. Don't be sort of so hard up about IP. It's better to actually think about creating values all the way. And when you are when you're successful, then you go for the IPs.
No, well said again. And I think this just shows that we might have some early entrepreneurs in our audience as well here. So thank you for those questions. We have one last question for you, Professor Lawrence, and this is more related to the surgery side of things, and perhaps even our next few speakers would be able to talk about it. But the question comes from Mohammed, who says, do you think that one day, because of the innovations coming in robotics, this might be something that could intimidate the surgeons of today?
No, I don't think so. The answer is very, very, very simple. In fact, we need them to do the robotic endoscope. Okay, we need a team of 2 people. And I think that in general, I still find that surgeons are more skillful, even when they're operating the endoscope, because I think it's a different form of training and so forth. So I've seen people operating, I think the surgeons are a bit better and so forth. So this is actually essentially is good for them, but in a different way that I do believe that in future, I think more and more we are going inside. And with more screening happening, I think we are picking out the conditions earlier, and then we have to go inside. And then the better person is actually a surgeon. Obviously, I think gastroenterologists can similarly be trained, but I believe that this is actually a common platform for everyone. After all, most importantly is, I think for the sake of patients, I think we've got to be non-invasive if possible.
Thank you again, Professor Lawrence. It's been an absolute pleasure having you with us. And we are grateful for your time, even though it's so late on your end. We appreciate it. That pretty much sums up our session, unless you have any other words to offer for our audience.
No, I think, yeah, this is something that I think is a very good seminar. So I think keep in touch with everyone. And I believe that everybody can become an innovator. We just have to let our mind go. So I have to go and sleep because I have to work the next, in fact, this morning, later on this morning. So I think, yeah, good luck to your meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye, all the best. Take care.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll go ahead with our agenda. Now we'll have Dr. Roger Georgi. Dr. Georgi has trained and practiced general and colorectal surgery in Sweden for about 20 years. Dr. Georgi is a faculty member of the European Academy of Robotic Colorectal Surgery, and he's also a founding member of the European Society of Coloproctology group for robotic colorectal training. So Dr. Georgi, you can go ahead and start. The audience is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation. Let's see, let's share the screen. There we go. Faisal called me like 7 days ago, I think, and said like, sir, I want you to have a presentation on a clinical engineer webinar. I said like, no way I can do this. I don't even know what I'm going to talk about. Okay, I know robotic surgery, but I don't know what you want to hear. So I said no initially. And then he is quite a stubborn guy. So he called me back and said like, okay, just if you can do 10 minutes. And then I go like, okay, let's do this. Let's see what I can share with you regarding robotic surgery. I have lived my whole life in Sweden. I trained there, and I started with robotic colorectal surgery like 2010, 10 years ago, with abdominal and especially colorectal surgery. When I started robotic surgery, my colleagues actually was laughing at me. They thought like I was playing around with a toy and having fun. A few years ago, all of a sudden, everybody believed in this technique and everybody wanted to start doing this kind of surgeries. And of course, I had several years of head start. So I was very happy to travel around and train surgeons in Europe and South Africa and Sweden and so on. Since September, I moved to Dubai. And my goal here to implement a robotic surgery program at Mediclinic City Hospital. We just received our robot 2 weeks ago, and hopefully I can do my first procedure in a few weeks from now. The topic I got was current and future trends in robotic surgery. I have to go back and talk a little bit about history because before I can talk about the current and future trends. The thing is that the first robotic system was developed by the state of the United States of America in collaboration with NASA. The idea was to develop a robotic surgical unit that could be used in outer space or also positioned like in a MASH unit where the surgeon can sit far away from the front line and help the wounded soldiers. This didn't work out very well, and they just let the whole thing die up. But there was a company that bought this rights for the robotic company and commercialized it for healthcare. This is two decades ago in the 1990s, and it was very difficult for them to have a takeoff. The last 2 decades, there have been a lot of technical innovation. First of all, in the 1990s, the development of minimal invasive surgery occurred worldwide. We started to do more and more keyhole surgery instead of laparotomy. And also the telemanipulation got advanced and got better. I mean, you're young, but I remember when I started to connect to the internet with 257 kilobyte line, and you could wait like 20-30 minutes to a web page to upload before you can read it. Now we have 5G and so on. And to be honest, in 2000, there was an operation performed where the surgeon was in the United States, and the operation, a cholecystectomy, was performed at the IRCAD Institute in Strasbourg. This operation took 1 hour, and they had to build a special communication between the United States and IRCAD in Strasbourg. And this 1 hour communication cost like 2 million euros at that point. Nowadays, that will cost nothing. The thing is that the only robotic company commercialized that really had is the Da Vinci, or the intuitive robotic surgery. They have had now several generations and got the robot more and more advanced. They started with the first generation in 1999, and the last generation which they have evolved in 2014 and did an extra thing on it 2018. This is how the robot looks like. This is the third generation with the patient chart with 1 camera arm and 3 robotic arms. And the surgeon will sit in this console looking at 3D and can operate from the console. Of course, you have an assistant near the patient if something happens or the surgeon needs some extra assistance. The last generation, the XI system, you see it here, it's the same console, but the arms are smaller, and you can actually do more wide range surgery with this system compared to the old generation, which has made it which made us to be able to implement laparoscopic minimal invasive surgery in more wide range of procedures. The problem that we have seen is actually that because there's only one company, it has been a monopoly for this company worldwide. They come with an upgraded version, and the instruments, you can say, is a single-use instrumentation. So they have limited life. One instrument has 10 lives, and then you have to repurchase a new instrument. And this will add up a lot of costs compared to laparoscopic surgery. And that has been a lot of disadvantage for the robotic surgery. Today, I think almost 4% of the minimal invasive procedures worldwide is done with robotics. So there is a wide range of procedures that would be able to be done with robotics, but limitation, I think, is mainly the costs. What is the pros and cons for this system? Mainly when you sit in this console, I know there is some medical students here, they have seen when we do laparoscopic surgery, and to compare it is like doing a procedure with, when you do laparoscopic surgery, you do a procedure with chopsticks. You have straight instruments. So your degree of freedom will be 4 degrees. You can go up and down, in and out, on the sides and so on. While when you do robotic surgery with this wrist manipulation, you actually have the same or even more manipulation than you have in your wrist. You have 7 degrees of freedom. So you add up some extra degrees of freedom. Adding to that, you have a 3D vision and you have a 10 times enlargement. So everything will become bigger, more precise, and with this degree of freedom. I would say that the advantages would be the same of laparoscopic surgery. Instead of opening up the patient from with a midline incision, they will have small incisions, and we can release them home earlier. We can see that they have less pain. They can start to eat faster. So there is a lot of benefits, and that is. There is a lot of scientific papers showing the advantages of minimal invasive surgery. The problem is that with operating with chopsticks, there is a few doctors that are very, very skilled at it, but the conversion rate for laparoscopic surgery has been quite high in the world. And it's going down with training, of course, but it's also going down much more with robotic surgery because the learning curve here is much shorter than with laparoscopic surgery. So there is a lot of advantages in that. And I haven't even started to discuss the young generation that's been sitting playing games with the PlayStation, Xbox. You have it in your mind, you have it in your hands. So when you sit in this robot, it will probably become more natural than it ever was for me. And one thing people often forget is the ergonomics. We see now a lot of studies that laparoscopic surgeons around the world will have to stop doing procedures early because they get stiff necks and they get shoulder pain and so on. This will definitely go away with doing robotic surgery. I can sit from morning to night actually in the robot without getting physically fatigued. You'll get mentally fatigued, of course, because you have to concentrate when you do a procedure. But when I do laparoscopic surgery, I get physically more fatigued, more tired. The cons here, and there are some cons, and one of them is that because of it's a robotic thing, there is today no tactile feedback. The company is working on that. And when they are asking me about the tactile feedback, I tell them actually that I don't need that anymore. Somehow, and I felt it when I did around my 75, 76 procedure, I developed something like a visual tactile feedback. So I could actually touch the tissue when I'm operating, and I can feel it with my eyes. It's like, you know, when a blind guy can walk around with his hearing aid, and when they sometimes get their vision back, they feel handicapped. They don't know how to do it. You develop some kind of a sixth sense. It's so difficult to understand and to explain, but every experienced robotic surgeon experiences the same thing. We can actually touch the tissue, we can feel the tissue with our eyes. The definite cons, which I talked with you before about, is that it's very expensive. I can't defend that because it costs a lot of money. And hopefully with the competition, the prices will go down in the future. This happened also with the laparoscopic surgery. When it started, everybody said it was too expensive. It's not gonna be worth doing and so on. But now the prices for laparoscopic surgery has come down because of the competition. And hopefully this will happen with robotic surgery too. And there is something of concern, which is docking time. You add up a time to the procedure to dock in the robot and so on, put the patient in position. And some people feel that that will take a long time. Initially, it could take up to half an hour. And nowadays, you can dock in the robot when you're skilled and trained in 2 minutes, so it doesn't add up so much time. Just want to show you a little bit how the robot works. And I wasn't so brave as my colleague Lawrence in Singapore to show you real surgery. So I show you a little bit how you can play with the grape and suture grape. And as you see here, again, I have a possibility to use 3 instruments. Here it's 2 instruments. You are seeing the screen in a 2D way. When I sit in the console, I see the screen in a 3D. So everything will be more enhanced and accurate. And I can actually do those maneuvers much easier than I do them in 2D. And imagine this is a very, very small needle and a 5/0 stitch and a small grape, and you still think it's very enlarged, and you see quite well what you do or not to do. So when I do robotic surgery in the pelvis, for instance, I nowadays see nerves that I never saw before and can preserve them. And I actually can use my knowledge to enhance my laparoscopic surgery. And this is what we want to go from. This is a rectal cancer procedure, a midline incision, 30, 40 centimeters. The patient will probably stay in hospital for 10, 12, 13 days. He will have a lot of pain after the procedure and so on. And then we do laparoscopic surgery. We have our robotic surgery. You see here, it's 1 centimeter or 8 millimeter holes right now. And then you have to do a small incision above the pubic bone to extract the specimen, of course. But those patients will be up walking day after the surgery. They will start eating day after the surgery, and I can discharge those patients 3 to 4 days after the procedure instead of being in hospital for 10, 12 days. And everything should be for the benefits of the patient, of course, what we do. Faisal, this is actually your fault. Because you didn't call me earlier than 1 week, I tried to get the new data. I couldn't receive them, so I'm showing you some of the old data, how many installed systems there is. Today, it's actually over 6,000 systems installed worldwide, mainly in the United States and Europe, and also Asia, such as Korea and Singapore and so on, which has been quite advanced in robotic surgery. And also the trend of the procedures going steadily up with 20% every year. It's over 1 million procedures, robotic procedures done every year nowadays, which is still a lot. And you see that it's mainly gynecology, general surgery, and urology procedures done. What about the future? Of course, this is the start of a new era. I strongly believe that in a decade or 2 decades from now, we're going to look at this robot and probably laugh at the robot as we laugh when we look at the first computers coming up. We will see more advanced instrumentation. We will go to lesser and lesser or smaller incisions. There are new robots, thankfully, coming out in the market, and hopefully the prices will go down. We are saying robotic surgery, but that is actually quite wrong, because this is more robotic assisted surgery, because the robot has actually, it just does what I want it to do. It doesn't have a software telling it what it could do or not do. The modular robot is actually has more brains than this robot has. But AI will probably be incorporated somehow. We can also incorporate imaging from the CT scan or the MRI, and we can probably practice to do the procedure the day before we do it on the patient, because we can incorporate the whole patient, exactly that patient, and the tumor that is there and how it looks, and we can practice before we go ahead with the live procedure. And also, I just got this XI installed with this simulated package, and we can in the simulator now do some of the standardized procedures like gynae procedure or colorectal procedure, or even a thoracic procedure in the simulator. And this will get more and more advanced. You see this picture, this is a single side port, which was a few years ago the future, and that is actually here. They introduced 2018 this single side port for the robotic system, which can you can introduce all four, the camera and 3 instruments in one single port, and the camera has this cobra eye movements. They can look around, and then you can do your operation with this. It's a little bit stuck. Sorry for that. The new robots coming in the market, and that is very interesting, because when companies like Google and Johnson & Johnson and other companies get involved to develop medical robotics, that means that they see that there is a market there. They see that there is a future there, and the future is actually, I believe, totally robotic. Every laparoscopic surgery 10 years from now will probably be done robotics. I haven't seen the Google J&J robot yet. I was actually invited to the States to test it out before the COVID, and then the COVID showed up and I couldn't go. Medtronic is developing a robot looking similar to this picture that you see down in the screen. And this picture down in the screen is actually an English company called Cambridge Medical Robotics. And they launched their robot just a few months ago. I have tested, it's working very fine, and it's a good complement, but they are quite young and they need to develop their robot. And I think there's 15, 20 other more companies trying to develop some kind of robotic surgery instrumentation. One company is developing an endoscope. You saw Professor Lawrence developing something. This is another company developing a flexible endoscope where you can actually have 2 instruments that you can work. The endoscope restrictions today is mainly that the endoscopist can work with one arm. I'll just move this forward a little bit. Here you see how this instrument can move. Are you hearing the sound on this? Or no sound. But you see the principle with this.
So we cannot actually see the movie itself.
Okay, I'll just talk. So that's great. I don't want it to be. And they use the flexible instrumentation that will cost less than the robot I'm using. And they will have more degree of freedom, of course. So I hope that was to your satisfaction. I hope you have some questions for me. I believe you and I, at least Faisal, will see each other in MediClinic, and you will probably be able to test the simulator and see if you have the skills to become a robotic or a surgeon. Thank you all.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Georgi, for such comprehensive talk. We do have a lot of questions from our audience. So Saad is asking, what role robotic surgeries can play in a value-based healthcare system, knowing that the total cost of care is going to be skyrocketing?
You have to. I totally agree that the cost is very high. The thing is that if you find the procedures that you can see a lot of benefits for the patient, you can actually reduce the costs. When I started up my robotic program in Stockholm, Sweden, the CEO of the hospital sent down the head of department, told me that I have to stop doing robotic surgery because he just saw the costs. And he saw that this was very expensive and the consumables cost was very high. The thing is that I registered everything on my patients from patient number one, and I could actually see that we reduced the complications with 70% almost. I reduced the length of stay for a rectal cancer case from 7 days to 3 days. And every day in hospital in Sweden will cost the hospital or approximately 1,300 euros. So already on the length of stay, I reduced the costs for the hospital. And then I reduced, of course, a lot of money with complications. And then we haven't even started talking about the benefits for the patient, the socioeconomical benefits. They can go to work earlier. They will have lesser pain, consuming medication, and so on. So if you choose the procedures that is accurate and you can save money, then you can actually, or you can save suffering and so on for the patient, you can actually save money. But if I do a cholecystectomy where we can do it very easy with laparoscopic tools and we can see this reduction in length of stay, that is of course very complicated and I can't defend stuff like that. But in the future, technology will always cost money. And in the future, I'm really hoping that the costs will go down. So this could be used for everyone around the world, even in low-income countries.
Well, thank you very much. Definitely focusing on more on cost effectiveness and not cost alone is going to help us make that transition towards future technologies. So Dr. Vargo actually has a question, multiple questions within the question. So the first one is, where has robotic surgery surpassed laparoscopic surgery in terms of cost effectiveness? And then the second one is, do you see robotically assisted endoscopic procedures without laparoscopic support?
If the first question, where it has surpassed, I don't think anywhere, to be honest. In many centers where they developed, started with robotic surgery early, I would say prostatectomies, that is mainly done robotically today. The urologist doesn't prefer to do it laparoscopic because it's very difficult. Open surgery, I'm totally against it nowadays, and I don't think we should offer open surgery if it's not totally needed. For colorectal surgery, I would say robotic surgery is surpassing in many institutes to be done robotically because we are seeing the benefits. And then I think the future is ventral hernia surgery. Ventral hernia surgery really causes a big incision, big operation, and now techniques has been developed to do a minimal invasive technique. The patient can go home the next day instead of staying in hospital for 6 days. And we don't need to use those very expensive meshes that we need to do to put on intra-abdominally. So there is also a cost benefit. What was the other question?
The following question is, do you see robotically assisted endoscopic procedures without laparoscopic support?
There is a lot of, I mean, ESDs and EMRs and so on is going to be done without laparoscopic support. But the interesting thing is that for more advanced tumors high up in the bowel, I think hybrid or collaboration endoscopically and laparoscopically will be the next step. So we can do both things. And I've seen in some of the conferences I've been, innovative surgeons doing like resections with the help of the endoscope and laparoscopic or robotic surgery.
Well, definitely, this is a call for collaboration between multiple fields, not only within medicine, but also among surgeons, as we've discussed. Now, the last question from Dr. Vargo is about the trainees' learning curve. How do you see the training being changed now that these technologies are emerging?
I have seen a huge change in training for surgeons, actually, and I'm, as you said initially, involved in the training in Europe for robotic surgery. The thing is that with laparoscopic and now even more with robotic surgery, we have somehow standardized every single procedure. So we divided it in small steps and train the trainees in doing all those small steps in a linear fashion. We have developed a Delphi program where we find out what the errors could be and how to avoid the errors and so on. So training is getting more and more advanced and more technical, of course, and also more and more structured, where you have trained the trainer. I mean, I've been training surgeons a long time. I never heard that you had trained the trainer sessions, and now I've gone to several train the trainer, how I should talk, how I should behave. So I like the way we are thinking about training. I heard someone talking about the risk of being surgeons being unnecessary when robots will come. I think that will never happen. You can compare it with pilots. They have flights that could actually start and land on autopilot, and you have an autopilot, and still you should have two pilots in the cockpit to fly a plane. And this will be the same thing with surgery. So the surgeons will always be needed to do and overlook the procedures.
And I will go with one final question. So I'll try to merge both Mihaela's and Soha's question into one. Have you faced some resistance from staff in the hospital or from patients in order to go towards robotic surgery?
Initially, I met a lot of resistance from staff, because when you start up a robotic program, the procedure will take a longer time. And there is some people that think that that is not good, of course, and so on. But after a while, everybody's convinced because they see the results and they see how the patients are doing and so on. The other question was?
More from the patient perspective. If
the patient perspective, of course, if you tell the patient that they're going to undergo a robotic surgery, they will just run away. I think you have to really explain what it's all about. You have to explain that the surgeon is still controlling, and that we're adding benefits, we're adding precision, we see better, we think that they will have a better result from it, and so on. And that I don't think is a problem now. When they started up this robotic procedures, mainly in the United States, a lot of hospitals purchased the robot to promote, to get patients. So they had the robot, they got the patients, and then they did the operation laparoscopically. Then they started to use the robot and got good at it, and now they want to do everything robotically. Even appendectomies is performed robotically.
I can imagine patients feeling that they could be guinea pigs and perhaps being afraid of that. Well,
initially that is the thing, but the system has been here now for 20 years, so I don't think there's any guinea pig tests anymore. We still are learning. We learn, I mean, as a doctor, as a surgeon, I learn every day, and this is the beauty with this job. I will probably continue learning until I retire, because you just learn new things every day.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And I'll just give you a quick hello from Mohammed, who's saying hi from Lebanon. In the interest of time, we'll go ahead and continue, but you're welcome to say some final comments, Dr. Georgi.
It was a pleasure to participate in this. I hope that there was something useful for you in this presentation that I cooked up for you in like a few hours. I hope we will continue our contact, and I will definitely have to see you. Okay, what happened? Oh, there you are. So thank you. It was a pleasure. I lost you for a second.
Well, thank you again for joining us and for sharing your insights about your work. We're really appreciative of it. All right, so Faisal, you can go ahead.
Right. Thank you again, Dr. Georgi. It was a pleasure. I certainly learned a lot, and can't wait to see you again as part of our surgery rotations coming up. And now we'll move forward with our next speaker lineup. This is now moving into the theme of artificial intelligence. And I hope that's exciting for our audience as we bring in Mr. Andrew Nin. Mr. Andrew Nin is the CEO and co-founder at DocBot, which is, and he's also the current Field Fellow and also a KPCB Engineering Fellow in 2015, and the youngest member of IEE EMBS from 2011 to 2014. DocBot is an innovative technology that incorporates artificial intelligence to improve the diagnosis of upper and lower gastrointestinal malignancies, as well as in the automation of documentation. Mr. Andrew, the floor is yours, and happy to see your presentation as well.
Thank you for having me. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Great. So again, thank you for having me. I'm here in San Francisco. We've been in quarantine for about almost 2 months. I think it was Mark Twain who said that the coldest winter he ever experienced was the summer in San Francisco. So I hope no one feels the same right now. So once again, I'm Andrew. I'm the co-founder of DocBot. I'll go into my background, how we got started with the company, its origins at UC Irvine with my partner, Dr. William Carnes, and a bit of background to the technology and really other areas and applications that AI can provide. So thank you for the background. I was going to say basically the same thing. I learned how to code when I was about 12 years old. I was self-taught. Later did bioinformatics research at UC Irvine at 15. And I guess something that was interesting was I didn't go to college at all. I actually, well, you know, I learned on the job really doing bioinformatics research throughout high school. I worked in the field as a data scientist in San Francisco at 19 with a specialty in natural language processing. So when we think of AI today, it's a lot of image recognition, but really AI wants to mimic any sort of pattern or any sort of human task that we're doing right now. And natural language processing is one of the last few areas that's really an unsolved problem. So what that basically consists of is you have a string of data, and it could be just human words. It could be a clinical abstract. It could be the New York Times. And you need to train AI to either produce something similar, like can an AI replace a journalist, or can AI understand what the contents are of that string of characters? It could be of any length. And so there's been interesting results since. The field is changing all the time. If you asked me 2 years ago, I would have said this was impossible. I spent like 5 years solving this problem. If you ask me now, the answer is it's a little bit solvable. We can actually use AI to, for example, we can do feature extraction. That's a pretty well-solved problem. AI can actually produce music, which is something that's kind of surprising. Like we think that, you know, a lot of it that is human creativity. But you know, maybe if you just took the top 40 music out there, it maybe does sound relatively the same. If you look at Baroque music, it all basically sounds the same. So yes, AI can actually reproduce some types of music today, which is actually very surprising. And I'll go into those methods later in a high overview. Also, interestingly, these are just kind of interesting things. I was the youngest member of IEEE, the Biomedical Society, ever. I think I was probably 14 when I got that. And I'm a current Thiel Fellow, if anyone's curious. The Thiel Fellowship is this kind of wacky program that one of the early PayPal founders and Facebook investors, Peter Thiel, created. He's very pro self-learning and learning by doing, and he's very anti traditional pedagogy. So he created this program where he basically said, if you're under 20, or now it's under 24, they'll give you like basically a scholarship amount of like $100,000 to not go to college. You cannot go to college. And that was okay because I didn't go to college anyway to begin with. Instead, I started DocBot after being in the field for a while with Tyler, who is, I've known him since high school. We were one of two kids who knew how to code. And Dr. William Carnes, who brings in all the experience. He had all the degrees that we didn't have. So he had collected a lot of data at UC Irvine, and I'll get into more about why we're targeting this problem in GI. Because I've never had a colonoscopist. I've never had a colonoscopy. I actually started this because I had a spontaneous pneumothorax. All my life, I've been doing very theoretical research, like can machines really interpret, you know, what this certain sequence in the gene really means. There's not a lot of literal impact in the field that we're seeing from this research. So I wanted to shift and use that software and AI and statistical knowledge to something that we can use today, like for colonoscopies. So what does DocBot do? We're probably one of the earliest efforts in applying AI to gastroenterology. And there were actually several problems, but since we've developed the company, we started with just a very simple task. Can AI tell whether a polyp exists in this image or in this video or not? And since then, we've grown this to polyp detection. We can classify a polyp pathology up to 3 or 4 different kinds of pathologies. So the most basic ones, like hyperplastics, sessile serrated adenomas, traditional adenomas, and we hope to be able to do like more specific, looking at different grades of dysplasia. Although that can be a pretty big challenge, although it is something that could be important in detecting dysplasia in, say, Barrett's esophagus, for example. We have products in sort of different areas of validation development for capsule endoscopy, inflammatory bowel disease, most notably for clinical trials. Like, for example, if you have, look at the Mayo score, if you have a Mayo score of, if you have 1 ulcer or 30 ulcers, you have the same Mayo score. AI can probably do a little bit better in giving a range of what the severity of the inflammation is. Procedure documentation, we saw that it was, well, this was kind of a twofold problem. We wanted to be able to label data in real time, so having the AI label data to train itself, but the clinicians also spend a lot of time annotating data. So we developed our system with like 10 years of labeled data. It was painstakingly done by tons of generations of fellows, attendings at UC Irvine. And we think we can do better with AI. AI can probably teach and learn on its own. And that's sort of an interesting area of AI research that's being done today. And also other interesting things like 3D temporal reconstruction. So here's a video of how it works. Hopefully it's not too lagging your side. So we're basically just detecting lesions and their pathologies. Hopefully everyone can see the video okay. Detecting multiple pathologies and polyps on one screen. So I think this is one of those examples of where AI can be pretty helpful. Like if you have a humongous 1 centimeter pedunculated polyp, you don't really need to even be a doctor to see that that's probably something abnormal. But in a situation like this, where you have, say, a spastic colon, there could be two adenomas, 1 SSA, or whatever they are on the screen. If you're a human, you're really focusing on one thing. Like as humans, we can't really multitask really well at all, even though we probably think we can. And this is true because if you look at capsule endoscopy, people can do like, you can have like 2 views, you can have 4 views. If you have 8 views, you're basically just lying, you're missing things. So this is where AI can be really helpful. Like what it can do is learn the temporal reconstruction of the colon. We can tell you where the polyps are on the screen, what they are. When the colon, it moves or it becomes spastic, you get pushed back. We still kind of know in this general area, there should be 3 polyps. And of course we can, at least at UC Irvine, we have most everything recorded, and the fellows are trained with the AI. And you'd be surprised in the early days how many times, when they weren't exposed to the AI, it alerted the attending post-procedure that actually there were things here that you should review. And then there were so many times when the patient was called back because an SSA was missed, because although the attending should be in the room, sometimes they're not. So this is how it works today. This is actually a model that we made probably 2 years ago, so it's been developed quite a bit since. A lot of what we do isn't really publicly available, but we hope that it will be soon. Let me go to the next screen. So how do we do this? Well, it just so happened that Dr. Carnes at UC Irvine, I guess he's the perfect example of a clinician engineer, although a very interesting one. His background was really in basic science research at Mayo Clinic. When he went to UC Irvine, he didn't decide to be an entrepreneur. This is also something that came sort of by accident. He saw there were a lot of problems, and there were problems in how do we track quality, how do we train fellows, how do we really, how do we improve just as a field. And so he developed his own software at the ripe age of 60. He learned how to code and developed his own software to track all this information, like the NSA of colonoscopies, and then painstakingly have generations of fellows, attendings, everyone, and mostly himself labeling all of this data. So, at first it was hard, but 10 years later, you have 50,000 something procedures, over 15 million well-annotated images, including pathology, which was really the hard part. One of the problems with just general collaboration among one institution and multiple institutions is you can have data from what you do, but if you're missing other pieces like clinic data, pathology data, you may not be able to have a very comprehensive system. So when Dr. Carnes suspected that the pathologist called an SSA a hyperplastic lesion, he would just literally call them and say, you need to reread the slides. I don't know very many people who actually do that, but these are actually just very fundamental problems we have in the field today that can either be mitigated with AI or somebody has to do it to, for us to advance as a field. I think another really interesting problem that we've solved, and I think this is very unique to not only GI, but also in surgery, is the real-time data processing problem. This is a very high throughput environment. The way I view it is gastroenterologists are like video gamers. So I don't know how many people are here to play video games, but if you can detect millisecond lag, and if you can differentiate between 120 frames per second and 40 to 60 frames per second. No one else can do that. So you're basically trying to do real-time analytics, predicting the outcome of the Super Bowl in real time. There's a lot of sensors. You just cannot do it with traditional hardware until actually, not to pat on back, we've been able to solve that. But that is thanks to, of course, NVIDIA and a lot of other hardware companies catered to video gamers that have enabled this to be possible today. And we've done a lot of bench validation. We had probably one of the earliest papers in this field. It was published in Gastro. I believe it was submitted in 2016, was published in 2018. We've had several other papers since, a couple in GIE, the Red Journal. And of course, there's a number of regulatory trials that we're either working on our own or with device and pharma partners that are pending currently. And this is, of course, possible because of deep learning. And this is actually where I think machine learning can become very relevant to clinicians of all kinds today. It used to be before, at least when I was doing this, which was not that long ago, that in order to build an AI model, you had to know the features. And that was a very tough challenge because it was very time consuming. If you want to detect polyps versus non-polyps, you have to draw like a very precise box. You have to define the parts of the box. You have to say, now you just need a label. But back then you had to show like these were the edges, these were the little worm-like features or brain-like features inside the adenomas. And so as humans, that was a very human constructed thing. We're shifting all of that to the AI. So the AI is doing all of that busy work. And so the power has now shifted. It's no longer engineers who have to create features painstakingly. It's now domain experts like gastroenterologists or really anybody in any field knowing what those labels are supposed to be, and the machine does all the feature extraction. So that's really the shift in the paradigm shift that we've been able to accomplish as a field in machine learning and artificial intelligence. So there's probably very popular words you've heard in literature. Convolutional neural networks, or CNN, not the news network, it's actually the AI. Those are great for perception tasks. So an example is dogs versus muffins. Like this is something that, I'm sure like if you have kids, that your kids can tell. AI can't tell right now, or it's not good. Like these are some of the tasks that AI can actually mess up. But these are sort of perception problems that are facing the industry. So it becomes, like this is a classic feature extraction problem, really. So this comes down to how do you really curate your data set and extract the right features. The other is LSTM. This is probably not very super popular in imaging tasks, but it certainly is in the field of AI. So this is great for sequential data. And unfortunately, the biggest use case now is for what's called deepfakes. So for example, you can take a video of Obama and then just feed it through an LSTM, and you can generate another video of Obama reading Hamlet, which I'm sure he's done, but I don't think he's ever done that publicly. So it is a little bit scary, but it also can be used very interestingly in healthcare. So an example is we don't have very good data right now. We have a lot of data. It's not very good because it's either mislabeled. It's hard to get from the EMR. Like good luck trying to get like on the CT scans out of Epic, for example. So you can have a very limited amount of data, but with LSTMs, you can generate a lot of the same data, which is some kind of variation on that data, which you can use to retrain the algorithms. That's back in the area of self or semi-supervised learning. I think one thing we can try to think about as a field is these are all kind of imaging or perception-based tasks, which is what we think the immediate application of AI should be. It is actually a lot broader than that. So we can think of AI as simple as something like Wolters Kluwer or UpToDate, which can exist in the EMR, which is a very simple, you put in an order to order some kind of medication, and it pops up an alert. Like, that's theoretically AI. It's like a very simple if-else statement. You can graduate to sort of a more complex system. So there's things that do a lot of sequential data, like EKGs. There's probably an area that's very underappreciated right now, and it's in voice recognition. That's certainly at probably one of the highest orders of AI in terms of complexity. I'm sure everyone here has dictated a report or something. That's all done with AI. And you bet those systems are learning based on your inflections, voice intonations, mannerisms, etc. Here's actually literally how a convolutional neural network works right now. And you can think of it really as a sequence of feature extraction and dimensionality reduction. So you take an image, it goes through several convolutional layers to extract those features, and then based on that, those features makes a prediction, like with ReLU or something like that, and it predicts an outcome. It can predict whatever you want. It can predict between 0 and 1. It can do multiple classes, although with multiple classes, AI doesn't perform as well. That's why AI sometimes can't tell blueberries versus dogs. But if your whole data set consists of blueberries and dogs, AI would perform very well. So multiple classes is still a very big challenge. It's sort of an exponential curve, and how much data you need and difficulty for the AI to learn based on that. And I think as a field in gastroenterology, and really just surgery, the reason why AI works so well for self-driving cars is that it's trained on just huge data for repositories from Google, Facebook, etc. And those data sets are basically normal data sets of dogs, cars, cats, dogs, trees. So if you're a self-driving car company or you want to build a self-driving car product, you already have a huge data set to work from. In GI, we don't have that. Actually, in any area of surgery, we don't have that. You have it in maybe radiology, and there's some problems there too. But really, I've been calling for this for a while. We need to have what's called an ImageNet for gastroenterology, and really just the whole human body. You need to have a fundamental layer that's been validated that works well for understanding what's inside the human body. And here's how I know that actually will work. When we developed our AI for Barrett's esophagus, we didn't have a ton of Barrett's esophagus images because well-trained labels with pathology are very hard to come by. You have to coordinate the biopsies taken, which bottles they go into, with what the pathologist is reading on their slides. So it's very hard to get very clean data, and you don't want to get that data wrong. We saw that we can reduce our data set requirements because we already had a humongous data set of just general areas in the human body, whether it's esophagus, stomach, colon pathology. So if you have a system that already understands the sensor pretty well, or understands what the general human body might look like, the cost and time and resources it takes for you to develop this for anything else lowers dramatically. So just from an endoscopic standpoint, we can lead the field for this and then later apply it to any other area in the human body. So I can see that the urologist, the pulmonologist, anyone else in the future is really going to train their models based on gastroenterology as the underlying feature model. And I think that's kind of all I have, although I think I try to make it somewhat relevant to what we're doing today with feature trends. So, I think where this can be immediately applied, what we're doing is software. I think there's a lot of benefits in that. And one is the ease of access and the scalability. I think telemedicine is going to be a huge area. I don't know what the futures of capsules might hold. I should hope that once we solve other problems with that technology could be more used in the future, but also telemedicine. And this is great feedback we get from all sorts of people we work with today. Like take, for example, Mayo Clinic. Like they have Mother Mayo in Rochester, who has the top doctors according to them. But they also have tons of other satellite clinics and other places where the primary endoscopist there could be the primary care physician or a surgeon or somebody who is in fellowship trained to do colonoscopies. They may have done 50, but they haven't done, a whole fellowship's worth in like 3 years versus 10 years. So this is something that can assist people in real time. And I know this is potentially a touchy subject. I don't want to get too political on this, but is there a future where you can have advanced practitioners, like a nurse, a physician assistant who's doing colonoscopies, supervised, like 3 of them supervised by 1 endoscopist? I think that's possible. I mean, unless we can churn out more colonoscopists in the next 10 years, which we won't, then I think in order to scale this up, you have to, kind of extend what there needs to be more extensions of the colonoscopist. And we're seeing that this is something that's being done today. Like you have Colorado, Portland, even like Johns Hopkins, who has kind of pioneered the area of having advanced practitioners. And to my understanding, areas in the UK and Australia are starting to do this as well. And certainly, I think it's possible where you can have, an endoscopist scoping. They see a polyp, and it's like, oh crap, I need to do an EMR, but there's no way I can get somebody to do an EMR on this for the next 3 months because there's no advanced endoscopist in my area. Can AI help with technique? Potentially, yes. Can AI help with the cannulation with an ERCP? Probably. I mean, we can help with driving cars now. Why can't you help with, telling doctors what the best angle is to cannulate the papilla? I think that's all possible, and there's no reason why you can't also phone in a friend. Like if you're having trouble with a polyp, just press a button, have the experts at your local academic center, see exactly the screen that you're seeing, and then kind of guide you along the way. Like that's something that I think can be done with technology and AI today. And that's really just a technology thing, not even AI specific. And I think I'm trying to think about, how we can be helpful in GI in the COVID pandemic. And I think, and I guess it's not really GI specific, but more kind of broad AI applications. I think one could be patient monitoring, of course, epidemiological modeling. There's tons of sensors now. You have a lot of data on patients, love it or hate it, but that's all stuff we can use to the benefit of society. Thermographic cameras, other sensors. When societies open up, which we have to, there's going to be a bigger emphasis on, understanding COVID testing and really being able to detect in real time. Actually, a leading indicator during the COVID crisis and even before Florida had their shutdown, the state of Florida, there were all these sort of public data sets of thermal cameras. And in Florida, there was a huge uptick in fever-like symptoms that were picked up by the camera, that the patient may not have been diagnosed with. So before the state was even shut down, it was known because the fevers were starting to spike up. And so this is all relevant information that we can use to just for the benefit of society, really. And so that's all I have. Probably talked for a really long time there, but does anyone have any questions?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Neel, for sharing with you all of your work and its applications in particularly the field of GI. Now we're going to go ahead with the panel discussion, and we'll leave the questions for the panel itself. We have a couple from the audience. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Jerome Vargo, who's a gastroenterologist at the Cleveland Clinic. He's the past president of the American Society of Gastrointestinal Endoscopy. He's also the director of Enterprise Endoscopy Operations at the Digestive Disease and Surgery Institute, and the director of Endoscopic Research and Innovation at the Cleveland Clinic. And I would also like to introduce Dr. Shvachiy Perez, who is a gastroenterologist at Swedish Medical Center in Seattle with an interest in the application of artificial intelligence for the diagnosis and management of gastrointestinal disorders. And of course, Mr. Andrew Neel, who has already given us an introduction of himself. So we're gonna go ahead and start. This is gonna be a discussion of some questions and answers that we've prepared and some of the audience as well.
Great. thank you for starting off this exciting panel discussion. And again, a wonderful talk from Mr. Andrew Nin on giving us that starter on artificial intelligence and its scope in medicine. So like we have the three panel speakers now, I'd like to pose our first question. And again, the audience is more than welcome to chime in. So the first question is really open-ended in the sense, what are some of the current applications of artificial intelligence in medicine or gastroenterology in your fields? And this is open to all of our three speakers.
Go ahead.
John, I think you should get started.
Are you sure about that? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think Andrew's done a very nice job setting the landscape. You know, I think that colon polyp, not only colon detection, but also classification of polyps. I think we're moving along very nicely there. I very much look forward to, I think Barrett's detection is very interesting because we see a lot of cases of Barrett's esophagus that are actually an abnormal GE junction that is classified as Barrett's. And I think what we need to have in AI is actually a break there where they say, okay, Dr. Vargo, is this an irregular Z line? Or is it actually short segment Barrett's esophagus? Actually, is kind of a teaching point or sort of a comprehension break to be sure that people recognize what Barrett's esophagus is. I'll stop there.
All right, so I'm just going to give like a broad overview in general in gastroenterology as well as in medicine. I think, as Andrew said, there's a lot of subcategories within AI itself that we can apply to medicine. And because I'm a gastroenterologist, my focus is on GI. But the first problem that we have come very close to solving is applying computer vision for some lesion detection and characterization. And the reason I say a lesion detection and characterization is because as endoscopists, we are looking through the lens of the camera, and whatever we see, we can, use AI to kind of augment our decision making as well as chances that we are not missing any lesions. So that is a broad category, whether it's for colon polyps or Barrett's or pancreatic lesions or gastric intestinal metaplasia, whatever I'm looking through the scope with whatever imaging technology. That is something that we can always improve diagnosis using AI. So that's one, broad category. The other category, which also Andrew kind of touched upon, is the natural language processing that we can probably apply bits and pieces, trying to get the right data in terms of pathology or, labeling your images or, extracting important information just from electronic medical records that you can later use to develop big data models to kind of use for prognostication, prediction, and basically you're reinventing all the existing medical models. Let's say it's your Rockall score for GI bleeding versus something else, right? So that's more accessibility to data in a more easy format. Then I think this is something which is not well known in general to medicine. At least most of my colleagues I talk to are not very aware of this particular sub-branch, which we call knowledge graphs. I think that is particularly important. Let's say if you want to look at the number of COVID articles, you want to see what GI symptoms are associated or something. You might have tons and thousands of articles already within 2 months. It's hard for us as clinicians to keep up with that knowledge base. So there are algorithms and these knowledge graphs by which you can condense that information. It's just like you Googling and saying, okay, what are the best institutions, right? You get a list. The same thing, you can use certain search engines that are much more, streamlined to medicine itself. So that would be a good project for most of us. And then lastly, a lot of it is the workflow, right? In endoscopy, we have so many different things that need to line up so that we actually perform a successful procedure. Let's say your catheters are missing or a specific tool is missing. So the supply chain management, the business management of endoscopy itself could be revolutionized. I think those are small areas at this point, which I see would have potential impact in the next 5 years.
Right, and Mr. Andrew, I mean, you've obviously talked about what DocBot has been doing in this area, along with some foundation on artificial intelligence. But would there be any exciting developments in other fields around, or even within gastroenterology, that you've found in your recent work?
Yeah, so I think there's sort of two areas that are kind of long-term, at least I'm thinking about them long-term, that I think would have an immediate impact. I think one is understanding the microbiome. And by microbiome, I mean just any sort of free-flowing information we can find that's non-imaging based. So free-flowing RNA, stool tests, stuff like that. Because eventually, I don't know whether it's 5 years, 50 years, 100 years, it's not unreasonable to think that there could be an alternative screening mechanism for colon cancer, stomach cancer, all sorts of other cancers. Obviously, one of the problems now is we can't tell if your FIT test is positive, you don't know where it's from. But things like that, I think are going to have a huge impact on gastroenterology. It won't replace colonoscopy, as you have to remove the lesions anyway. But I think that's something that we're trying to think about all the time. And we want to be really the data and the knowledge company, not just generally just the AI company. And the other, I think, is 3D temporal reconstruction, because that's something that has a true memory of the patient's anatomy. So I think that's going to have huge implications. Obviously, you can use that to see where have you seen, where have you not seen the colon, and that has positive benefits as well.
Yeah. So, the organization I'm the endoscopic enterprise. I have 25 sites of service, and we do over 100,000 endoscopies. So it's a big ship. And Andrew brought up some interesting points. I mean, you can see where the power of AI has potential, but I just want to kind of drop back a little bit. This whole idea about setting up an EndoNet is really important. I've heard Andrew speak before on EndoNet and what we need to do, but I think some of the things we have to look at is we have different city states of innovation that are kind of floating. I wouldn't say aimlessly. Everybody has their own direction, but it's not a group direction. We need to be able to bring that to bear. And when we look at what's happened with COVID, the opportunities, there's been opportunities created by COVID. It's given perhaps other groups a time to catch up to more established groups, but the VC and the collaboration necessary to set up an EndoNet maybe have gone a little bit into stasis. So hopefully all of this will get set up. You brought up some really important points about colonoscopy screening. I think when the test characteristics on fecal testing, stool testing, get where they need to be, it'll become the standard. There's no doubt about that. In my opinion, surveillance, probably not as much, but then we're going to need bring the technology to bear from AI in order to be sure that you can identify the polyps and remove them if they're there. You brought up about nurse-assisted colonoscopy. It's something we've been really looking at, as you brought up. They've been Tony Kalu's been doing this at Johns Hopkins, and having a room where you have maybe 3 practitioners, nurse practitioners doing colonoscopy if they're so well trained, as they do in Great Britain. You can see the value that you can bring to your organization doing that. I also see the power of having AI to interpret an image and say, Dr. Vargo, this is a Kudo Pit 5. It's depressed. There's a probability of a cancer here. You should probably just biopsy this area here in the polyp, not on the areas on the side. And that picture can actually generate an instant consultation to a colorectal surgeon and things of this nature in order to improve the lead time in order to get those things taken care of. So there's a lot of stuff out there, but the problem we have right now is we've got to get more. Everybody has to get on the same page, create a symphony rather than different notes that don't make a song yet.
Exactly, Dr. Varga. And you've pointed out how important the collaborative efforts and working as a team is important. Are there any particular interventions that you feel are going to be helpful as far as collaboration in order to move the field forward?
Well, I think Andrew, I think I'll defer to my other speakers, but I think it's key developing a group that can that feels comfortable working together and sharing that data in order to push forward. And there are a lot of dynamics that can affect that. Sometimes it's institutional, sometimes it can be other. But I think the key with this is developing this EndoNet, at least in part, and then hopefully making it more of a symphony down the road. We need more data. We need collaboration. We also need to figure out what we want to put in that EndoNet. I remember Andrew talking in December about, you know, what are the minimum requirements for that data we need in order to feed that beast, that learning, that nationally based learning machine, for example. Do we want to go 5K? Is it just HD? Do we need to get MBI in there? Those types of things.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'll follow up on Dr. Vargo there. So as most of you might know, might not know, when Dr. Vargo was the president of ASGE, there was a ASGE AI task force that was developed specifically for gastroenterology. And one of the major goals of the task force is to basically build this data set that could be used for training and validation of some of these algorithms in a very neutral fashion. So that's something I think the seeds have been sown by Dr. Vargo there. And we are working towards developing that platform.
Great.
Right. And again, looking at how much of collaborative efforts are important in the field of AI and medicine, that makes me sort of think about even the other side, which is being realistic with AI and addressing even its disadvantages that could potentially be in healthcare or GI in specialty. So the question really that I ask for all three speakers and our audience as well is, what are some of the disadvantages potentially that could lie with accepting this potentially overhyped technology in our generation?
I think I'll get started. I think the first most important thing, as you asked in your question itself, there is an answer, right? The hype of it. So we cannot, as in, the credit card business and stuff like that, there has been a bias introduced, right? And we realized that later that, in the credit card, credit limit was basically completely a biased system. So that we cannot afford in medicine, right? So even if it is a minor distraction to the endoscopist or the medical person, if the algorithm is biased in some way, it's not ready for deployment. And that basically calls for this larger platform with diverse data sets instead of these these algorithms being just kind of validated and developed within one particular kind of center or a few centers. So that would be my primary disadvantage at this point. But as we move forward with more broader applications and more data sets, I think that is a problem that we can solve.
From my standpoint, it is the retrospectoscope that could be used in quality data. I think it's very important. We all want to be the best surgeons and endoscopists and clinicians we can be. And I forward thinking, you utilize this technology to help make you a better doctor. Why did I miss that polyp? What was the subtlety that I missed? And I can tell you, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've missed things, but I've also learned by careful observation, by utilizing other people's observational abilities in order to be a better polyp detector. We all learn from each other. We have to be open to that. And I think one of the things we have to utilize here is ensure that the quality data is a quality improvement type data. We don't want to get enmeshed into medical legal type of things. We're all here to push the envelope, to be the best detectors, and the best resectors. One of the things we haven't talked about much right now is, okay, Dr. Vargo, you're all happy about finding the polyp, but did you realize you left a little piece of that adenoma over there? And I think these are some of the opportunities that we will have in the future to interrogate polypectomy areas in order to optimize our ability to ensure that we did leave any polyp, for example. The whole thing with training is really interesting. You know, COVID has put a lot of fellowship training pieces into stasis, unfortunately. Can you picture if we had a mature AI library, our fellows still could be learning, you still can learn about polyp detection by doing it on video and notice, you know, learning the Kudo pit classification or the Perez classification. Obviously, that's not augmenting your colonoscopy technique, but you know, there's a whole piece there in terms of detection that could potentially be learned outside of a patient, thereby mitigating some risk in terms of procedure length and things of this nature. So this can be a whole library of how we train our fellows in the future to become better obstetricians, if you will. Thank you.
So I think it's pretty, I'm actually a little bit, I think that was actually very timely, Dr. Vargo, your comments on that. There was a fun thing that, you know, we did internally where we were actually able to track people's gaze on the screen while actually showing an endoscopy video. And what I can say between the, and I mean, with the data, but this was just like a for fun project. We haven't like really analyzed the data, but between like say an expert colonoscopist versus someone who's never seen a colonoscopy before, the results are pretty interesting. And I guess what we can say so far is I'm pretty convinced there's people who can just, who are either trained or just naturally extremely detail oriented. And there's some who would view it and it's interesting to see where people were looking at on some of these videos. They were labeled with known polyps and stuff. So yeah, it's a very complicated problem, but we'll, that's something that hopefully we'll get more interesting data on. As far as drawbacks of AI, I think one of the key things, and there's sort of, you know, the regulatory answer and the right, and the more long-term thinking answer. Like, of course, like there's risk in the short term of like unnecessary polypectomies, post-polypectomy bleeding, stuff like that. Which, and, you know, the other is kind of dependency. And obviously nobody here is going to be dependent on AI because, well, you're experts, that's why you're here, or soon to be experts. But I've seen probably, I don't know, 200 at least different colonoscopist scoping in the last 5 years. Oh my God, there's people who do like, there's people who really care and they look at every detail. And there's people who just consistently do 1 or 2 minute colonoscopies. I didn't want to ask them, but you know, I'm pretty sure like there were missed polyps there. And I don't know why. I don't know, is it because they just want to do procedures quickly and get billing? Is it because they really think they're seeing everything? You know, but all these, so I'm afraid that with AI, eventually there's going to be a dependency, because what we saw, and this was surprising, that there were, we just through a lot of use, there were people who were, you know, like non-expert colonoscopists who were just very confident in, you know, in their abilities. It's like, we're going to be right all the time. And there's like chief of GIs that use our product in the early days when we were, you know, still iterating the product. Who were using it, and then 3 months in, they're like, I'm kind of questioning what I know now, because we don't know if it's like the AI's false positives or they're feeling that they're starting to rely on the AI. So I think that these are all kind of soft user experience type issues. As an engineer, I think the solution is, you know, like as the technology improves and the consistency improves, it starts to become more, these problems start to go away. However, the problem is that if there is something like inherent bias, can we ever really tell? And so I think this is where, like, as you know, just as a GI community, we can be well ahead of the regulators, or actually educate the regulators and on what these problems are, because, you know, they're not scoping every day, you guys are. And maybe the solution, or the short-term solution, could be if you can crowdsource, the best data set that's, as diverse as it gets, with as subtle polyps as it gets, there are well-known missed polyps, you can validate that through eye tracking. Can the AI at least perform as well as the annotated data set? And that could be the benchmark for a head-to-head comparison. Because otherwise, how would we do a trial? You'd have like a 10,000 patient humongous trial to track like ADRs. Surely if you do something like a tandem colonoscopy, you're going to get the best doctors doing it. You'll never get the private practice guys doing 2-minute colonoscopies to do those. So I think there's a lot of this validation and there's that whole process that's very difficult right now. These are kind of moving problems in just AI in general.
Well, thank you for sharing us these drawbacks, and I feel that they open up also some room for solutions on the long term. Now, there's one question. It seems like the field is definitely growing as far as research. How do you feel that it could be applied and brought to the general GI practitioner down the road? How would that implementation need to be?
So in terms of execution of AI algorithms to the practitioners, is that your question, Katherine?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
How can it be implemented, I would say?
Right. So that's basically integration into clinical workflow. I think that is a very interesting question, because I don't think we have made much progress in that, which is not anywhere close to where we want it to be, but that would be the future. And I would start with the example of radiology, because they have been much more advanced than GI in terms of implementation of some of these AI algorithms into their workflow. And some universities have been successful. But when it comes to actual implementation or execution of having an AI model in the backdrop, especially in not in a private practice setting or a commercial setting, it has a lot of pieces. Firstly, you have the regulatory hurdle, of course, the technology itself, then the validation of the technology, and then you have the regulation. And once the regulation is passed, you need the billing for it to support it as well. Like, who pays the money for this, and who is implicated if there is a mistake on behalf of the AI, or is it the clinician who takes responsibility? So there's a lot of unanswered questions, and also a lot of work for the GI societies on that matter to kind of put together and push this very important technology forward. I would like to see what Dr. Varga thinks about that.
It's a great opportunity for us. It's always better that we lead our own practice rather than have somebody. It's interesting. Andrew brought up the whole thing about the domain in AI. It's better that the person is a domain expert, learn AI, than vice versa. I think it's always better that a physician group that's purely looking at evidence-based and doing the right things for their patients leads the regulatory piece in terms of getting the data together, than having a regulatory body step in and try to define what that looks like. And I think that's it's an exciting time for us to do that. We need to take ownership of that, and if we don't, someone else will. That's the important thing there. And I think I can answer for ASGE. We have our task force, and we're trying to put together in white papers what this should look like. And then hopefully people can build upon that and get that data to the FDA, so that when they come up with a certified AI platform for Barrett's esophagus or polyp detection and classification, they can look at data that will help them say, okay, this is what we're looking for. This is what the box looks like in order for us to get that package, that platform certified to be used, and again, hopefully adopted by health systems, because there's not only is it's shown the ability to perhaps augment detection as well as saving lives. Those are things that health systems very much are, we're all interested in that.
Can you repeat the question one more time? Because I'm not sure if I understood it. Sort of the question behind the question.
There seems to be a growing body of evidence about AI. Regardless, the general GI practitioners seem to be not to have a proper grasp as far as what can be done and the limitations. So how can we train those physicians who are practicing in order to incorporate AI into the practice? What are the steps that should need to happen?
Yeah, this is a very, I'll give my opinion. I'll avoid turning into like a 30-minute discussion because this is such a complicated topic. There's definitely, the best way is to align, and this is where I guess at least American healthcare is very complicated. And it's that sometimes the business interests and the interests of the patient aren't always aligned. And so you have a lot of barriers there. I think a lot of this, well, I think and maybe this comes down to why webinars like this exist, is that I think the more educated the broader public, the regulatory bodies like the FDA, and maybe as part of just training in general for whatever field you are, having maybe I think every field is going to have sort of two kinds of people. And we're seeing this in radiology today, where you have, there's going to be the tinkerers, which is sort of like this small, maybe 5 to 10% of, of radiologists. And they're the kind that are actually actively out there doing AI research today. Like they are actually learning how to code. And I'm surprised how many of them I find that, when I asked me 10 years ago, there was maybe like 10 to 20. And now you probably have like easily 2 to 3% of the whole field has, or at least has some very, very, very deep understanding of the technology. So I think we're going to see this in GI and in all the other specialties and modalities as well, where you have people who understand it as a broad concept, and then the tinkerers who are sort of at the mix of knowing the statistical part, but also the engineering part as well. So I think that having more of those literal clinician engineers is going to help a lot with just because they're going to be the nexus for the whole industry.
Right. And again, these are all such dynamic perspectives being shared here. And again, discussions like these really stand out for longer than 30 minutes, like you mentioned, Andrew. My question sort of as a concluding part to this panel discussion, and this sort of brings into the current advances that AI has taken in the field of both GI and medicine in general. This could come off as a threat and even intimidate the doctors of today, especially with the hype of AI replacing doctors that we continue to hear on a daily basis. So just quick comments on what are your thoughts on this and how should the doctor of today react to this technology?
John, you want to go first?
Yeah.
Okay, I will, since I'm probably the oldest person on this. So I just can tell you some of the, just to briefly, some of the things that have happened during my career, and Dr. Gurji can talk about this too, because first we did not have laparoscopic cholecystectomy, then we had laparoscopic cholecystectomy, changed the whole dynamic. All of a sudden, laparoscopy opened. An amazing thing happened. Surgeons were not replaced. They learned a different skill set. They're doing different things. When I was training for advanced endoscopy, there was no MRCP. We used to shoot pancreatograms, I wouldn't say indiscriminately, but we had nothing else to fill that void. Then we had MRCP, and everyone said, oh my gosh, ERCP is going to go away. It didn't go away. We just had focused therapeutic procedures, is exactly what I like to do. We're going to see colonoscopy, screening colonoscopies under threat. And is that a bad thing? Come on now. It's not. If we can amplify who gets screened, a major problem we have is getting our patients screened. If they have a positive screening test, we're all going to be busy, and we're going to have the best detection skills and the best polypectomy skills. So I'm a past president of an endoscopy society saying this. So I'm going to have to park my car somewhere else differently? No. Forward-thinking doctors realize that medicine goes ahead, and it's part of our goal to keep ourselves current and to learn new techniques. Stopping at your fellowship program with your training, that's not the way to be. That's you know, we all have gone forward in our skill set, and we'll continue to do so. I don't see this as a threat. I see it as a phenomenal opportunity to be even a better doctor, and actually to open up other practice vistas for us to get involved in.
I think that was very well said, John. I would just listen to Dr. Gurji as well.
I can comment a little bit on this, and I totally agree with you, Dr. Vargo. The thing is that we can't be intimidated by the AI. In contrary, it's gonna make us become even better, do more advanced surgeries, do more advanced procedures, and have more to do. I would say that AI will be a huge part of our education. For instance, there are softwares now developed that could actually calculate the range of motion a surgeon is doing during a procedure. And range of motion, the higher the range of motion you have during a specific procedure, the less effective movements you have. So it would give you an idea how bad of a surgeon you're doing, because you're all around the place. And in the end, that helps you to practice to have every movement you're doing to become an efficient movement, something that is a useful movement. And that will be, you will have so much feedback after your procedure, what you're doing, and that will give you the feedback that the elite sports guys are having from everything. You know, when you see a football game, you can actually get the feedback on how many kilometers a specific player are running throughout the whole game and so on. You get so much information from the betting sites and so on, because they know everything. And this is the same thing with the AI that we can use for different procedures and so on. So that will be an advantage for us. We will become better. We can do more advanced procedures. 10 years ago, nobody did rectal cancer if they had liver metastatic disease, because we don't know what to do. Now, the majority of patients has a quite good 5-year survival because we have advanced in our techniques. And with AI, we can even level it up a little bit further.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I think the quality of our care and the quality of what we do is definitely going to improve as we incorporate some of these AI algorithms and newer technologies as we move forward. I don't think most of the current generation of physicians are intimidated by AI. I think it's just using that to your advantage and move forward. But one thing I would like to also kind of mention is, as we think about AI, how it can help, I think it won't penetrate, or it is not absorbed into the physician community if we don't have education about the basics. Meaning, we need to understand how to interpret an algorithm. We don't need to know how to run an algorithm. It's good if you can, if you want to know and tinker around with that, because there are not a lot of non-coding algorithms available right now. But I think as physicians, just how we interpret statistical, inferences in a research paper, we need to understand how to interpret the accuracy of an AI algorithm. And that's where some education in this field is important. And I think ASG has been doing a great job with that, and they came up with this GI AI conference, which is a multi-stakeholder conference. And because of the COVID, I think it's got a pushback, but I'm hoping that that's something that would be a good avenue to learn all this. We certainly recognize that the next generation of physicians and physicians who are already in practice need some hands-on experience as we move this field forward, and we want more people to kind of understand how this works in real time.
Great, and I guess I'll conclude since I'm probably the youngest person here. I can say at least from just a user experience standpoint, and kind of speak on behalf of the company too, is that one of our main objectives, and when we develop products for anything, is that we want to keep the joy of colonoscopy and hopefully expand on that, not make it like a brain dead procedure because AI is finding everything. So I guess it's like, how do you enable discovery and not take that away? So we try to develop it's really beyond just the algorithm, it's the whole experience that the colonoscopist goes through when they're doing an AI colonoscopy versus a standard colonoscopy today. And those are things that I think it's going to be generational. There's going to be a lot of user experience research that we'll be doing, but those are some of the things that I'm looking forward to. Like, can you do a colonoscopy? And with software and just ease of references and all that, you're now seeing more things and getting more relevant information in real time. For example, knowing the pathology of polyp immediately, being able to get like, knowing the grade of inflammation, or just knowing more information and seeing things that you otherwise wouldn't be presently. And I think that as long as we make the procedure more exciting, I think that's the key.
Well, we definitely have a very exciting topic that I hope that continues to permeate not only within the field of GI, but also within all the fields. So I'd like to thank our speakers for the time that you've dedicated to this webinar. It's been our pleasure to have you participating here. Thank you also to our audience for your valuable questions. I'd also like to thank my co-hosts for all of your help trying to make this very smooth, and also to the Clinician Engineer Hub that make all of this possible. So thank you, everybody. There's one last thing that I'd like to do, and if you could all put your cameras on so we can take a group picture, then we'll share with all of you.
That's one good thing that came out of webinars.
There you go, I think. Ready, set. I'm trying to do it now. Ready, set. If you can take a look at the camera now. There you go, I've taken the picture. So thank you all very much. I hope that we can do this again and hope that the field moves forward. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
All the best to you. Have a good day.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.